Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
So first of all, just to make sure everyone knows Cantor is fine. It's just the end of Pesach, and she's spending some time with her family tonight, but all is good. And luckily for us, we have Michael, Shalom, who is with us tonight to bring some joy and music to our hearts. Let's begin together on page 128. Hine matov umanayim shevet achim gam yachad. How good, how wonderful it is when brothers and sisters dwell together.
Hine matov umanayim shevet achim gam yachad. 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 Hine matov umanayim shevet achim gam yachad.
Before we formally welcome in Shabbat with Lecha Dodi, let's take a little time to greet one another and to introduce yourselves to people. Assume they have no idea who you are, because they may not, particularly with their mask on. So for those of you who are joining us from home, wish each other Shabbat Shalom, let each other know who's on there, and don't be afraid about getting up and walking to a total stranger and saying, "Hi, my name is..." I gotta get my fan.
Malachei Hashem, Malachei
So now that we've begun to know each other, I hope we continue those conversations during the oneg after services. But the Sabbath Queen has many synagogues to visit tonight, and we're at the top of her list. And so, why can I not find it? So we continue with Lecha Dodi on page 138, and we'll be singing verses 1, 2, 5, and 9. Page 138.
Lecha lecha dodi likrat likrat kala B'nei b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha lecha dodi likrat likrat kala B'nei b'nei Shabbat nekabela. La 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 la. Lecha dodi likrat likrat kala B'nei b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha lecha dodi likrat likrat kala B'nei b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Shamor v'zechor v'dibur echad Ishmi'anu el gam yochad. Adonai echad u'shemo echad. Adonai echad u'shemo echad. L'shem el tiferet beliti la 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 la. Lecha dodi likrat likrat kala B'nei b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha lecha dodi לקראת קלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לקראת שבת לכו ונלכה, כי היא מקור הברכה, מראש מקדם נסוכה. סוף מעשה במחשבה, תחילה לה 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 לחדות. לקראת קלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי, לקראת קלה, פני שבת נקבלה. התעוררי, כי באורך קומי אורי, שיר דברי. כבוד אדוני היה לקניק, לה 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 לה. לך דודי, לקראת קלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי, לקראת קלה, פני שבת נקבלה. בואי ושלום עטרת בעלה, גם בשמחה ובצהלה, תוך כמוני עם סגולה. בואי חלה, לה 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 לחדות. לקראת קלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי, לקראת קלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לה 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 לך דודי, לקראת קלה, פני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי, לקראת קלה, פני שבת נקבלה.
So one of the things that I've really missed the last 2 years is having our students on the Bima. So I would like to invite up anyone who is in our religious school or who has taught in our religious school as a madricha or a madrich to come on up and to join us on the Bima and to do us the honor of lighting the Shabbat candles. I know who the students are. She can't save you. Come on up, guys. Oh.
And we expect you to know that.
But first, we continue on with Shalom Aleichem on page 142.
Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hashari, Malachei Elyon, Mi Melech, Malachei Amlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Boachem l'shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Mi Melech, Malachei Amlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Baruch atah
Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kishanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel As these Shabbat candles give light to all those who hold them, so may we, by our lives, give light to all who behold us. As their brightness reminds us of the generations of Israel who have kindled light, so may we, in our own day, be among those who kindle light.
Baruchuni l'shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Mi melech Malachei Amlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Tzedchem l'shalom Malachei HaShalom Malachei Elyon. Mi melech Malachei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
We rise for the Baruch Hu on page 146.
Baruch Hu et Baruch Hu et Adonai Hamvorach. Baruch Adonai Hamvorach Leolam Vaed. I'll sing it.
We continue on page 148.
As soon as I find it. Ow. My protective gear is not working. Lai 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 lai. La 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 la. Lai 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 lai. Lai 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 lai. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Asher bidvaro mariv aravi mahariv aravi V'chokma poteach sharim Uvitfuna meshane itim ומחליף את הזמנים, סדר את הכוכבים, משמרותיהן, ברקיע כרצונו. איי 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 Borei yom v'layla Golel or mipnei choshech V'choshech mipnei or uma'avir yom Umevi layla Mavdil ben yom uven layla Adonai tzevaot shemo Ay lay 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 La la lay 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 Lai 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 El Chai v'Kayam Tamijim lo chalin leolam va'ed Baruch atah Adonai Amari Aravim Yai dai 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 Dai, 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 Amari, Aravi.
Page 150.
You won't find this in the Siddur, unless you have the Beatle version of the Siddur.
Wouldn't that be nice?
That would be cool. Who knows how long I've loved you? Who knows I love you still? I could wait a lonely lifetime. If you want me to, I will. And if I ever saw you, I didn't catch your name, but it never really mattered. I will always feel the same. Love you forever and forever. Love you with all my heart. Love you whenever we're together. Love you when we're apart. And when at last I find you, our song will fill the air. Make it loud so I can hear you. Make it easy to be near you. For the things you do endear you to me. Oh, you know I will. La da 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 da. La da 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 da. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. 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 Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto, Leolam Va'ed. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto, Leolam Va'ed.
It was fitting that the version of the Ahava that Michael sang tonight was a love song, because during Pesach, one of the things we're supposed to read is Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, which is love poetry. The rabbis understood these poems as being an expression of the love between the Jewish people and God, and that the festival of Pesach is a manifestation of that love, that it was for love, or out of love, that God rescued us from Egypt and brought us towards freedom. We sometimes forget that love is supposed to be part of how we celebrate Judaism, that it should not just be something that is serious, but also something that is meaningful and joyous. And so we continue in the English on page 155 so that we could remember, Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha. You shall love your God. Together on page 155. Love your God with every heartbeat, with every breath, with every conscious act. Keep in mind the words I command you today. Teach them to your children. Talk about them at work, whether you are tired or you are rested. Let them guide the work of your hands. Keep them in the forefront of your vision. Do not leave them at the doorway of your house or outside your gate. They are reminders to do all of my mitzvot so that you can be holy for God. I am Adonai, your God. I led you out of Egypt to become your God. I am Adonai, your God. We continue together with the Micha Mocha on page 158.
Hi da 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 ya da 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 ya da 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 ya da 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 ya da 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 mi kamocha ba'elim Adonai mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh nora tehilo osefele nora tehilo osefele Malechutecha ra'ovanecha bokei hayam lifnei Moshe Ze Elianu ve'ameru Adonai imlo leolam va'ed Ay da 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 ya da 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 ya da 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 ya da 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 ya da 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 ya da 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 ונאמר, כי פדה אדוני את יעקב, וגלו מי החזק ממנו. ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל.
The three festival holidays, the three most important holidays that the Torah speaks of, are Sukkot, Pesach, and Shavuot. All three of those holidays have a story that is rooted in the Exodus from Egypt. Each has a story reminding us that we were once wanderers in the desert, refugees, searching for a safer place to live. We remind ourselves of this history every day in our daily liturgy. We remember what it was like to be vulnerable so that we will treat others who are going through that with compassion and with caring. When we pray the Hashkivenu, we're asking God to please protect us. I think of these words as they were written at times in Jewish history where life was scary for us, where we didn't know if we would sleep safely through the night or there would be dangers. We're lucky now. For most of us, life is fairly safe and fairly easy. But as we say these prayers, we should remember there are so many others who are laying their heads down on concrete or on dirt, or maybe their jacket crumpled up in a ball, who seek the same things we do, to lay down our heads in peace and to rise up safely again. And so as we pray the Hashkivenu, let's think, what are the things that we could do for those who are seeking shelter? How can we make their prayer a reality? Page 160.
Oh, guide my steps, help me find my way. I need your shelter now. Rock me in your arms and guide my steps. Help me make this day a song of praise to you. Rock me in your arms and guide my steps. Ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha. Ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha. Rock me in your arms, guide my steps.
I'd like to invite up all of our B'nai Mitzvah students to come and join us on the Bima. Bring your prayer books with you to help us help lead the Vishamru and the Tefillah. This is practice for B'nai Mitzvah. Yeah. And if you're not sure if you're a B'nai Mitzvah student, if you have a date assigned to you already, he's not, is he in 5th grade? Okay, then you're safe. Page 162.
Veshamru b'nei Yisrael ha-Shabbat lasot et ha-Shabbat לדורותם ברית עולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם, אותי לעולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. כי 6 ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים והארץ. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. וביום השביעי שבת ויהי נפש, שבת ויהי נפש, שבת ויהי נפש. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם.
Please rise for tefillah on page 164.
Adonai sefatai tiftach ufi yagid tehilatecha. Adonai, open my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, v'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'Koneh Hakol, V'Zocher Chastei Avot v'Imahot, U'Mevi Geula Linehem, Leman Shemo Be'ahava, Melech Ozer U'Moshia U'Magen. Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham be'ezrat Sarah. Ata gibor leolam Adonai, Mechaye hakol, Ata rav lehoshia. Morid hatal, Mechalkel chaim bechesed, Mechaye hakol berachamim rabim, Some noflim verofe cholim, Umatir asurim, Umkaye emunato, Lishenei afar, Michamocha bal gevurot, Umidom elach, Melech memi, Umechaye, Umatzmiach Yeshua, V'ne'eman ata lechayot hakol. Baruch atah Adonai, Mechaye hakol. Ata kadosh v'shimcha kadosh, Ukdoshim b'chol yom, Yehelucha selah. Baruch atah Adonai, Ha'el HaKadosh.
We continue praying privately from page 172 through 180, either standing or sitting, as is your custom.
Say shalom bimromah. Say shalom aleinu. Ve'al kol Yisrael. Ve'meru imru amei. Yaseh shalom. Yaseh shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael.
Our thoughts now turn towards loved ones or perhaps even ourselves, anyone who is in need of healing of body or healing of spirit, as we continue together on page 371.
Mishaberach Avotenu, Avraham, Yitzhak ve'Yaakov. Mishaberach Imotenu, Sarah, Rivka, Leah, Verachel. May the one who blessed our mothers, may the one who blessed our fathers, hear our prayer, hear our prayer, hear our prayer, hear our prayer, and bless us as well. Bless us with the power of your healing. Bless us with the power of your hope. May our hearts be filled with understanding and strengthened by the power of your love. Bless us with a vision for tomorrow. Help us to reach out to those in pain. May the warmth of friendship ease our sorrow. Give us courage, give us faith, show us the way. Mishaberach Avotenu, Mishaberach Imotenu. Hear our prayer, hear our prayer, hear our prayer, hear our prayer, and bless us as well. Hear our prayer, hear our prayer, hear our prayer, hear our prayer, and bless us as well.
Shabbat Shalom. So who wants to guess what the number one question I get every Passover is? What do you think the most asked question I get? Yes, when can we eat bread again? Why is there such confusion amongst Jews about when we can eat bread again? Emmett, where's the confusion coming from?
In Israel, it's 7 days, and here it's 8.
For everybody here, is it 8 days?
I don't know.
And hence the questions. So, In Israel, it's very clear. They follow the rules that are in the Torah, which is 7 days. However, after Jews went into a diaspora, the rabbis added an extra day because all of the holidays get an extra day just so we don't mess up and stop celebrating too early. And so you're right that in the diaspora, Jews traditionally celebrate them for 8 days, except for Reform Jews. Because Reform Jews said, you know, that rule came into effect when we couldn't necessarily, the way we were telling the calendar was with fires on a hill. Do you guys know about that? Fires on a hill. So like there'd be a guy sitting on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem and he would be looking at the moon to make sure that it was the right day. When he spotted the moon, he'd light a fire to signal that the festival has begun. And then the guy on the next hill would see his fire and he would light a fire, and then it would keep going all the way into Babylonia. As you could tell, that is probably not the most efficient way to transmit the beginning day of a calendar. And so it would take an extended period, and hence the additional day of festivals when we were in the diaspora, just to make sure that we didn't mess it up. However, here comes along Reform Judaism, very analytical, very practical, and says, people, the calendar has been set for thousands of years. We understand this thing called math, and we actually can figure out when, 1,000 years from now, what day Passover will begin and when it will end. So Reform Jews said, no, 7 days. And part of that was also a big power move, because if you control the calendar, you're in charge. As Jews, we know that, because are we in charge of the American calendar? How do we know we're not in charge of the American calendar? Right, because we have to take a personal day. Well, I don't have to take a personal day for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. My work actually won't give me those days off, no matter how much I ask. But you're right, we don't get national holidays for our religion. So that's a pretty big clue that we're not in charge of the calendar. And who's in charge of the calendar is everything. So we have this confusion, which is why on your pink sheet, that actually is not the Torah portion we're reading, we as our congregation is reading this week. Because as practical as the reformers were in the 1800s, those of us today say, we have some other considerations that we have to consider. And Passover and Sukkot are actually some of our, actually all three of the festival holidays that could go either from 7 days to 8 days or 1 day to 2 days, like Shavuot, messes up our Torah reading. How could it mess up our Torah reading? If I'm celebrating, if I stop Passover tonight at sundown, then what should I be reading tomorrow? I should be reading from the regular weekly Torah reading. But if I believe that Passover doesn't end until tomorrow night, then I have to read the Passover reading for Passover, which means Reform Jews and conservative Jews are going to be out of sync in terms of our Torah reading between now and Shavuot, when things should get back on track again. So for practical reasons at B'nai Israel, you could start eating bread tonight, but we're going to go with the festival Torah reading so that we do not mess up our B'nai Mitzvah students in being in a different Torah reading. And if you think that this is a strange conundrum, ask my husband what it felt like to get the wrong Torah reading 2 weeks before his bar mitzvah to find out that going to Israel he had to do something entirely different after studying for months and months. Oh yeah, didn't really make a difference, but it wasn't fun. So this brings us to our Torah portion for tonight. If you look at your handouts, the text that we have is from the 8th day of Passover festival reading, because when we have a festival that lands, that corresponds with Shabbat, there are special Torah readings that are outside of the weekly portion. So for this Shabbat, for the 8th day of Passover, according to the Torah reading schedule, we read from Deuteronomy chapter 14, 22 through chapter 16, and we read from Numbers chapter 28, verses 19 through 25. And what these two readings are about offerings to God. The portion from Numbers is very specific, with 6 verses about Passover offerings that we're supposed to make. And from Deuteronomy, it's a little bit different. It talks about what we're allowed to eat, talks about tithing, and it also talks about kind of social justice. But I wanted to look at the concept of the offerings, because offerings are huge in Judaism. What do we call offerings today? What do we call our sacrifices that we offer today? No, one would think. No, I mean that would be the logical conclusion that tzedakah or financial offerings are the equivalent, but it's actually something else. And this is what we learned from Maimonides, that the substitute for the physical offerings is prayer. So the work of the temple was avodah, and that was the sacred offerings and sacrifices. And when we do offer prayers, it's called avodah shebalev, the work of the heart. And Maimonides teaches us that's what God really wanted all along. However, our ancestors liked being like everybody else, and everybody else were making offerings to their gods, and so we insisted on doing it as well. So let's look at this little excerpt. Do I have anyone who wants to read? Anyone not shy? Jason? Could you read the section from chapter 14?
Yes. You shall truly tithe all the produce of your seed that the field brings forth year by year. And you shall eat before the eternal your God in the place which God shall choose to place God's name there, the tithe of your grain, of your wine, and of your oil, and the firstlings of your herds and of your flocks, that you may learn to fear or revere the eternal your God always.
Okay, let's stop for a second. How are we giving God our offerings? What did you do last Friday or Saturday night? What did you complain that it took too long to get to last Friday or Saturday night? Dinner. Right. The offerings that they're giving to God, you shall eat before the eternal your God. We often think of the offerings as being something that went up completely in smoke. That only a few sacrifices did that. Most of it was a glorious barbecue. Think about everything being cooked, as they would say in Israel, ala esh, on the fire. And all of these yummy things would be consumed by us, because what God got was the smell, and we got the food.
And if the way is too long for you, so that you are not able to carry it, or if the place is too far from you, which the eternal your God shall choose to set his name there, when the eternal your God has blessed you, then shall you turn it into money, and bind up the money in your hand, and you shall go to the place which the Lord your God shall choose, and you shall bestow that money for whatever your soul desires, for oxen, or for sheep, or for wine, or for strong drink, or for whatever your soul desires. And you shall eat there before the eternal your God, and you shall rejoice, you and your household.
And so, any questions about this passage? Anything strange about this passage? Where are we supposed to go? Where are we giving these offerings to God? We have no idea. Like, it's TBD, to be determined. It is in a place which God shall choose to place God's name there. Both in Numbers and in Deuteronomy, we're not told where we're supposed to offer these sacrifices. We're told that God will determine it, but we're not told where. So where do you think we made these offerings? Yeah, Lynn, hold on, let me bring the mic to you. Wait.
This is so weird, and if the way is too long for you, so that means we could go anywhere. We could go 20 feet if we had a real kvetch.
Right. So God is making it easy for us. God is saying, look, there's going to be a place, but if that's too hard for you, don't worry about it. You have an alternative. There's different ways. There's different plans. Right. So we also see that offering these gifts shouldn't be an insurmountable task, that God is trying to make it so. Why do you think God is trying to make it so anybody can do it? Wait, say that again. God didn't know what? Oh, God knew how whiny we could be. By the time God gets to Deuteronomy, we have been plenty whiny because we've been at it for 40 years. maybe that's why. Maybe God knew that we would be whiny and was trying to circumvent that situation. But why make it easy for us?
I have a question.
Say that again? So we'll do it. God is trying to take away those obstacles to be able to do it. And what is it that we're doing here?
I have a question.
Ask away.
So it says in English, it says before God. Is that in front of God physically, or before God in time,
Let me
or
look.
both? Or
That
is there
is-
no difference in Judaism?
No, no, there's definitely differences. Let me look at Deuteronomy 14. Which verse are you looking at?
22 to 27, chapter 14.
Oh, wait, all of it? No, which sentence are you talking about where it says Lifnei Adonai? Does it,
Well, it says before God in several places.
show me which one you want.
Like you shall eat before God. It says,
Oh, so I think the last sentence, 26.
like this first verse here, it says, in verse 23, and you shall eat before the eternal.
I so wish this was bigger.
Does that say Panah?
It says Lifnei Adonai, so before God. Yeah, so Panav is like in front of.
Presence of.
Yes. I would say in the presence of is a good way to translate that. So what does that mean to you? How is that different the way you interpret it?
Well, being in the presence of God is a more spiritual state than a physical state.
Ah. So, you got a mic. So what does that mean to you, that it's a more physical state rather than a spiritual one?
It certainly lends itself to the sense that God is where you feel God. And we were several chapters before commanded to build a mishkan, which would be a place for God to come and dwell. So theoretically, if we're in the mishkan or anywhere around it, we should be in the presence, because we follow the presence and then we put up the tent,
Well,
don't we?
I'm not dwelling in my house right now. Can you still be before me?
Are you God?
No, but I liked your comparison or your explanation that it's different to be physically rather than spiritually in front of
Well,
someone.
I think where we're going with this is wherever your spirit is, there can be God.
Right. So maybe the vagueness that we're being given here is a very deliberate vagueness that God is giving us. And if you turn to actually, let's go to the bottom for number one. One of the things that we think of, where do we generally think? If I said, where are we supposed to give offerings to God? What would you say? The temple, capital T, the capital T temple, right? We think of the temple in Jerusalem, that was the place where we did it. So that actually was just a great marketing ploy by the descendants of King David. Because one of the things we know from archaeology, and even that we know from our own Bible, is that there were actually altars set up all over the place. That before King David came into existence, there were altars all over the place. The different tribes would each have their own place to send their offerings. Kind of like, what does Sacramento and Albany have, Sacramento, California, and Albany, New York have in common? And what do we send there? Taxes. We send taxes, because another way to talk about some of those offerings was, though you were right, those, well, not so much tzedakah, those were taxes, things to uphold the priestly community, because the priestly class doesn't have land like the rest of the tribes, and so we would send them the food, and that was how they would eat. And so we know that there were altars every place, and that's also part of what split the northern kingdom of Israel from the southern kingdom of Israel, was an argument, because the northern kingdom people said, hey, we have this great altar up here, this is really working for us, I can't remember. I think it's Megiddo, but I'm not sure. If you look in the second paragraph for the number one here, we see the names of the different altars that are in the north. One of those towns that is totally escaping me was the capital for the northern kingdom. And they wanted the taxes to keep flowing into their place. And the people in the southern kingdom, who were the descendants of David, said, oh, no, 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 Jerusalem is the only place that these should go to. Why do we think of Jerusalem and not the northern altars? Anyone want to guess? How did the southern kingdom do such a great job with marketing? Right, we were the only ones left. So if we're the ones writing the book or codifying the Bible, then we're the ones who get to say which place is the legitimate place. However, we see that the Jewish people end up splitting much more than just the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. We get scattered all over the place. And if you turn the page, there's a beautiful little interpretation that Polish Jews used. And I love this because this was something that I first thought could be a reform teaching, but it's not. It's actually from an Orthodox teaching. So Jews started to settle Poland around the year 1100, and they started going further north. But there's a question of how do they know that this is an okay place for us to settle? How is this a legitimate place? And so they looked at the word Polania, and they said, Polania. If you look at the handout, po, what does po mean? Here. Lan comes from the same root as the Hebrew word melon, which is hotel. Lalun is like a fancy schmancy way of saying to sleep. Instead of to sleep, it would be like, he retired for the evening. Something like that. It's just a more fancy way of saying it. And Yah, whenever you see Yah at the end of a word, especially a name, it means God. So like Zachariah, Zachary, that has to do with God. Any name that ends in Yah in Hebrew has to do with God. And so they said, Polania, what it really means is God dwells here, or God rests here. So this is a place that we can stay. And so if you're looking at the biblical text that we look at in Deuteronomy 14, what we see is with God saying, there will be a place that I will choose. Who's to say that place isn't Sacramento or Stockton or Modesto or pretty much any place else that we settle? And that is actually what was a radical idea that Reformed Jews started to say in the 19th century. Have you ever noticed that we call Jewish congregations different things? What are some of the names we have for Jewish congregations? Just shout it out. Synagogue. Is that a Hebrew word? Right, synagoga. It comes from the Greek. What are other words? Why would we have a Greek word for a Jewish congregation? This is an easy one, people. We lived in Greece. I mean, we lived in the Mediterranean. We lived as part of we were under both the Greek and the Roman empires. What are other names we have? Beit. I'm thinking just in America, what are names? Okay, if you have not noticed that there's about 10 names for synagogues everywhere, you have not noticed that? Like, there's Temple Emmanuel, I'm blanking on some of them now. Temple, that's a popular one. Temple Isaiah is a good one. Temple is what we often call them. What are other words that we use for our houses of worship in America? Jewish houses of worship. Shul, and shul comes from, but what language? Right, so it means school, and it comes from Yiddish. So that has a indication to us that if a congregation is calling themselves a shul, they're probably more traditional. And that education, religious school, family ed is probably a big part of what they do. What are other words? Have you ever heard kahila or community center? Have you ever heard I'm trying to think of my cousin lives near one, like say the Riverside Jewish Community Center. Have you ever heard of a synagogue called something like that, a community center? No one? Those are some of my favorites because that is a more obscure one. Anyone want to guess who was in the fashion of calling their congregations community centers? Reconstructionist. Reconstructionist Jews saw Judaism as a civilization, and that our community was at the center of it. And so a community center is what they would call it. When you hear the word temple, though, it almost always indicates that it is a Reform synagogue. Our congregation did not start out as Temple B'nai Israel. We only became Temple B'nai Israel after we became Reform. Because to call our synagogues a temple was a very strong statement that this is the center of our Jewish community. That it's not Jerusalem, but it's here. Now, there were some conservative synagogues in the 20th century that would refer to their congregations as temples, but it was a less political statement. They saw their congregations as the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy House, is what the temple in Jerusalem was called. And so if that was the Beit HaMikdash, the big and holy house, then a congregation was a Mikdash Me'at, a little temple, a little fragment of it. And so we began to call our congregations temple. And once we start doing that, then how can we read, how do we interpret these verses from Deuteronomy? Where does God dwell? Where does God choose to place the divine name? What? Here, but what does God need? Michael, you referred to it earlier when we built the Mishkan. What did God need? An invitation. that when we built the Beit HaMikdash, God says, build me a sanctuary so that I may dwell amongst you. That wherever we gather to create a sacred space to invite God in, that's the place where God puts the divine name. There has to be a partnership. Remember how I said that the rabbis saw our relationship with God as a love story? It should be a partnership where each invites the other into that space, where through mutual consent and admiration and affection, we dwell together. And so when we read this text, how wonderful, how beautiful that thousands of years ago we're given a teaching that allows for us to move, to travel, to go to different places, to have different situations, and that wherever we go, whether it was in the desert in Sinai or here in Sacramento, all we have to do is invite God in, and God will dwell with us. Chag Sameach. Oh, and it's your choice if you want to start eating bread tonight or tomorrow night. But we've got matzah on the bima just to be kind to those of you who are waiting till tomorrow night at sundown. It's now my pleasure, I think, to invite up what I believe is an 8-day Passover guy. Are you an 8-day Passover guy? Not anymore? Not anymore. That is actually probably one of the biggest attractions for conservative Jews to Reform Judaism. We could have rice and only eat matzah 7 days. So I'd like to invite the president of our congregation, Josh Mastronardi, to give some Shabbat greetings.
That was the sole reason I joined a Reform synagogue. Shabbat Shalom. And thank you to Rabbi and Michael for a great service. And thank you, Rabbi, for working all the holidays. And no, you can't take them off. Tomorrow morning, or tonight after services, we have an oneg in the courtyard. Tomorrow morning at 9:30, Torah study on Zoom. At 10:30, the Kavanah Shabbat service, both in person and on Zoom. It's a wonderful service if you haven't had a chance to check it out yet. On Sunday, religious school resumes. And at 10:15, there's a Yom HaShoah speaker program for the religious school as well as their parents and caregivers, and I believe it's open to the entire community. At 11 o'clock, the Shmooze School, there's a focus on racial justice, working through uncomfortable moments about race. That'll be in the social hall. On Tuesday, the 26th, Dr. Adar Cohen is hosting the Israeli Book Club to discuss A Pigeon and a Boy. You probably still have time to read it if you haven't yet.
I'm just laughing at the title.
On Sunday, May 1st, the community-wide Yom HaShoah commemoration presented, it's going to be virtual, presented by the Jewish Federation. There's all the information should be in the Hadashot on that. And then on Saturday, May 7th, you should have gotten an invitation. You may have gotten multiple. We're returning, the first time in 3 years, to the annual CBI, this year it's being called the Spring Homecoming. It's going to be fun, festive, live music. There'll be some items to bid on. Should be a great time, so check out the details, and all the info on getting tickets and everything is in the Hadashot and in the invitations you got. And now I'd like to invite all the board members present and any past presidents or committee chairs. I can just repeat his name.
Oh, that it works too.
Jason Wiener's in the house.
Michael Herscher, and I am chair of the Lifelong Learning Committee.
And Michael could have approached the microphone, but if you didn't hear, that's Michael Herscher. That's all I have. Shabbat Shalom. See you at the Oneg.
Thank you, Josh. And one little word about the oneg that I forgot to say. If you look at the Torah text, the last verse for Deuteronomy 26, it describes the eating of all the food and the drink. It tells us we shall rejoice. So that is part of how we know, what does an oneg mean? No one remembers what oneg means? It means joy and rejoicing. Because for us, eating dessert, this is joyous. And so we continue with our service, and to get closer to our oneg on bottom half of page 586 with the Aleinu, please rise.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדם, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא, שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסד ארץ, ומושב יקרו בשמיים ממעל, ושכינתו זו בגובה מרומים. ואלוהינו אין עוד, אמת מלכנו אפס זולתו, ככתוב בתורתו, וידעת היום והשבותה אל לבבך. כי אדוני הוא האלוהים בשמיים ממעל, ועל הארץ מתחת אין עוד. ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד.
Please be seated. Our thoughts now turn to loved ones who are no longer with us. And it is with great sadness that we announce the recent passing of Carol Trachtenberg, the beloved mother of Jeanette, Tracy, and Jeff Egan, beloved mother-in-law of Carrie Egan, beloved grandmother of Bethany Grove, Nathan Egan, Mitchell and Rachel Warrington, and beloved great-grandmother of Simon, Lucia, and Louis Grove. It is also with great sadness that we recall the recent passing of Gail Blair Leatherwood, the beloved father of Blair Leatherwood and Melanie Souza, beloved father-in-law of Judy Emick Leatherwood. And also with sadness, we recall the recent passing of Steve Romer and Karen Romer, the beloved brother and sister of Sonny Romer, beloved uncle and aunt of Noah and Naomi Solomon Oblath and Aaron Oblath, and beloved great uncle and great aunt of Ilana and Shira. Zichronam livracha, may their memories forever be a blessing. We also recall loved ones who have passed away at this time in years past. We remember Julius Abrams, John Allen, Walter Baker, Myron Citronbaum, Jenny Cohen, Marvin Dinsfry, Stella DeTursi, Eli Dworkin, Albert Elias, William Emick, Rosalie Friedman, Daniel Geller, Robert Gisser, Helen Goldberg, Abe Harris, Shalom Horowitz, Donald Hughes, Florence Keplinger, Bonnie Kutschenreuter, Franklin Leschner, Ivan Levin, Catherine Marcus, Herbert Mendel, Helen Mendick, Ann Michaels, Gussie Michaels Larange, Eric Nance, Harriet Narens, Robert Oblath, Sidney Perlis, Shalom Elazar Reches, Paul Rosen, Saul Rubin, Morley Siegel, Doris Selig, John Shannon, James Shelton, Alfred Spivak, Alan Stanger, Erwin Stein, Ralph Swerdlow, and Ray Usher. If there are names of any loved ones that you would like to say Kaddish for today, please feel free to call out those names as my gaze meets yours. And for those of you who are joining us at home, please feel free to write the names of your loved ones into the chat. If you're saying Kaddish for a loved one tonight, I'd like to invite you to please rise. And if the congregation can please join me in these words of comfort. Hamakom yenechem etchem betok sha'ar avlei Zion v'Yushalayim. May God comfort you among the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. We rise to offer comfort to those who mourn as we continue together on page 598 with the Mourner's Kaddish. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah, be'alma divra chirute v'yamlich malchute, b'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chaye dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala uv'izman kari v'imru amen. Yehe shmei rabba mevarach le'olam umei almaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitba'ar v'yitraman v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei tekudsha b'richu, le'elam min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata, damiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehe shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Osei shalom b'marmav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. May the source of peace send peace to all who mourn and comfort to all who are bereaved, and let us say, amen. Please be seated.
These are the gifts that we bring, that we may build a holy place. This is the spirit that we bring, that we may build a holy place. We will bring all the goodness that comes from our heart, and the Spirit of God will dwell within. These are the colors of our dreams we bring to make a holy place. This is the weaving of our lives we bring to make a holy place. We will bring all the goodness that comes from our hearts, and the Spirit of love will dwell within. These are the prayers that we bring, that we may make a holy place. These are the visions that we seek, that we may build this holy place. Let our promise forever be strong. Let our souls rise together in song, that the Spirit of God and the Spirit of love, Shekhinah, will dwell within.
And so we conclude our service with the Kiddush and a Motzi. Michael, do you?
We'll get that later.
Yeah. So please join us. If you are looking for the words, the Kiddush can be found on page 123, but please join us.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei pari hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu, v'shabbat kodsho Uvratzon hinchilanu, zikaron lemaaseh bereshit, ki hu yom techila lemikra kodesh, zecher letziat mitzrayim. Kivanu vacharta, meotanu kidashta, mikol ha'amim, v'shabbat kodshecha, ve'ahava uvratzon, hinkaltanu. Baruch atah Adonai, Mekadesh HaShabbat. Amen. L'chaim o shalom.
It is a very sad thing indeed to see the sharp edges underneath a challah cover. There's plenty for anyone who wants to come and get one to motzi off of.
A full deck.
It's just so sad. Like by the end of the week, it's, you know what my favorite name for matzah is?
No.
The bread of our affliction.
Oh, yes.
Here, do you want to motzi with me?
Sure.
Baruch
atah
Adonai
Eloheinu melech haolam, motzi lechem haaretz. Amen. Yeah, you get to eat it all.
Yeah,
Good for you.
I'm not sure if I won or if I lost getting the big piece. But there will be tastier things than the bread of our affliction awaiting us at the Oneg in the courtyard. Feel free to come and take a slice. Otherwise, please join us in the courtyard.
Shabbat shalom.
It really doesn't get better after a week.
No, it doesn't. Unless you put chocolate and caramel on it.
Or chopped liver.